Welcome to the final installment of our Communicating Forestry and inviting various professional writers and friends. So today we've got Jim Finley, retired professor of forestry from Penn State. And then Jim's going to go first. And then after that, we'll have Nancy Baker, who edits Pennsylvania Forests for PFA, and Steve Weiland, who's on the West Coast. He's on Oregon time, so he's up until a little bit later. But Steve edits the Forestry Source for SAF. And before we get started with Jim this morning, I did want to share with you some of the results of the survey. Thank you guys for filling that out. I've got about half of the folks reporting, and it sounds like all but one of the people who responded to the survey said that they would be involved in some sort of workshopping type of group. We'll probably start to organize that in about 2 months from now is going to be my knee-jerk guess. So, you know, we're here at the end of September, maybe mid-November, late November. We'll get together our first workshopping event with those who are interested. We're going to try and get Claire back and start that to kick off our first workshopping event. So we'll figure out what kind of writing you guys might bring to the table. If it's something that's assigned or something that you're working on specifically, we can figure that out later. Most everyone said they wanted it to be regularly scheduled. We're split straight down the middle as to whether we do it every month or every 2 months. So we'll have to make an executive decision on that one. Everybody was interested in having similar types of conversations as these. Maybe we have another writer come on. Maybe everybody seemed to be interested in video, learning more about how to use effective video for communicating. People were interested in blogging, in giving PowerPoint. So all of those different types of media garnered about an equal amount of interest. So our little committee, Sandy, Tracy, Jared, Paul, myself, we're all definitely dedicated to continuing this in some fashion. The workshops will be first. That'll be our priority, just to get writing continuing. And then just to give you guys a sense, I know I personally have been really affected and inspired by this series. Susan Lacey with the Allegheny Division asked us to put together an article on the series for the Allegheny News. And I was excited to put to use some of the tips and tricks that I'd learned from all 6 of the people that we'd had so far. So I put together a draft, I sent it out to the committee, I got amazing comments and edits back, and it's been a very fruitful enterprise to now apply what I've learned and be more excited about writing than I ever have, because I'm usually not excited about it at all, which is why we put this series together. Just to let you guys know that that's sort of the next steps. We'll be in touch again with everyone. I hope some of you may have already received your books on writing well. If not, you will be receiving them very soon, maybe next week. But until then, keep in touch of other things that you might like to see or might like to see in terms of next steps. Otherwise, we'll touch base sometime in October, and I'll go over this again at the end. With that, I'm going to be your interviewer today. So Sandy has been our intrepid leader over the past 3 sessions, and today I'm going to take over and have a conversation with Jim. Jim, how long have you been retired?
3.5 years now. Okay. Almost 3.5 years.
It didn't seem like that long.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Thank you for joining us and talking about writing. I know there's a few of folks on here who have had you as a professor at Penn State or have worked with you on writing and know a little bit directly about your style. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how you did get started in writing, and then what has motivated you to continue writing, or the kind of writing that you did professionally.
Well, you know, I sort of went down the traditional track of almost everybody who's a natural resource person. I went to Penn State, graduated. My goal in life was to avoid people. And that seemed to be working for the first 3.5 years. And then I got tied into some work on what we now call human dimensions with the U.S. Forest Service, trying to figure out how you who owns the forest of the nation? And that led me to understanding I needed to go back to school, and I got a master's degree. And in that master's degree, I again studied people. And when I came out of my master's 45 years ago, 45 years ago, I got hired by Penn State Extension. And so I went from avoiding people to being front and center with people. people. And as an extension educator, I had to begin to learn how to write. And so I had to write news articles. I had to write things for newsletters, and sort of that utilitarian kind of writing. And I see myself as a utilitarian writer, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. But I started writing then, and I have to admit that I was an abysmal writer. My choice of vocabulary was probably poor. My sentence structure was probably even worse. And I started to improve. And then in the early 80s, I went into the university as an extension specialist in maple syrup and Christmas trees. And somewhere in that time, it would have been somewhere around the 1990s, I had a tormentor show up. And tormentor is my base word for mentor, or mentor is the base word for tormentor. I don't know which way it goes. And he chastised me thoroughly on how I wrote and helped me see construction and style. And that was a motivator to begin to think about how one writes. And then I had to start teaching undergraduates. And one of the first undergraduate courses I taught was, I taught small of woodlot forestry, but then I taught Forestry 200, which is on how to become a professional. And in that, I began to devise ideas about how to get kids to write about things that they ought to learn to write about. And I graded on what I called a portfolio system. And in the portfolio system, students would turn in a paper, and then it had to be edited by 2 other people. And so students had to edit student work. And I didn't grade the student work, I graded the editors. So they had to learn how to edit things, how to look for structure, how to think about how other people wrote. And then the student was allowed to rewrite the paper based on that. And then I would start to edit the papers. And that was a real learning experience. And I continue to do those kinds of things with students the rest of my career, whether I was teaching undergraduate or graduate students, helping them learn how I saw writing ought to happen. And it was always a learning experience. I remember the last class I taught in 2016, I had a student challenge me and said, I've taken every Penn State writing course and I know how to write. And I said, well, you ought to go back and take some of them over. And so that's how I've learned to write. And I continue to write as a emeritus faculty member, and having started the Center for Private Forest at Penn State, I continue to support that. I work with Nancy on the Pennsylvania Forest magazine. I've got some editing right now to do for Dave Jackson. And so I've published, I think, a half dozen papers since I retired. And so
Wow.
Writing stays in my life.
What's your favorite type of writing to do? What do you tend to gravitate toward versus maybe how do you, so 2 questions, what's your favorite type of writing to do? And then have you been challenged by an assignment, and then how have you tackled that?
I like to write news releases. Those 500 to 1,000, 1,200 word type things. I like to think about, and again, I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but I like to think about what people want. And I tend to write for those kinds of things. Challenges were always academic papers. Writing an academic paper is, I don't know, aggravating. Because some of the people who edit and review papers in scientific journals have their own styles. Sometimes they pick up nitpicky kind of things, and so you have to consent to what they want, and it's as if you don't really have control over it. I find that really aggravating. Recently, I rewrote a paper for the Harwood Development Council at PDA, and that took me a while to do. And then um, manuals and things like that sometimes are difficult because there's a juxtaposition on how people have to learn certain things before they can learn other things, and so you have to think through the process of how flow happens and what you anticipate people understanding easily and not. So those are always difficult things to write.
Well, and so in our previous conversations, and I think you and I talked about this a little bit too, a common theme is creating a story and engaging your audience and making sure that they want to come along on a story with you. A technical manual doesn't, I mean, I guess it does kind of have a story. You need to like go step by step and make sure that people are following it, but there's not a whole lot of, is there any creativity there? I mean, how do you
Oh,
create
sometimes
yeah.
you can get creative by telling the breakout, the sidebar stories. Um, for instance, if I'm teaching somebody about mensuration and I'm teaching them about taking a sample and trying to get them to understand how a sample expands to a population, and if you do a lousy job at the sample size, what happens to your population estimate? I recall when I worked for U.S. Forest Service in Maine, somebody tallied a walnut tree in Washington County, Maine. One walnut tree turned into 6 million board feet of walnut. And so all of a sudden the data didn't look right. And so how can I tell a story around collecting data right if I can just explain to people how an error can make big differences in outcomes? And so you can often figure out a little sidebar to tell in there.
Right. Yeah, that's a good example. Well, I know you have a PowerPoint that you put together that has some things that you wanted to share. Is this a good time to bring that up
Sure.
and share some?
Yeah, let me see if I can get this to work. I told Sarah I have a lot of angst about this, so let's see if I can get it to work. All right, so I started with this quote from
It's
Ed
not it's
Gibbon.
not showing up. It's not showing
It's
up
not
right now.
showing up. I didn't share the screen.
Yeah, you got to
But I
share your screen.
share my screen. Share screen. Here we go. I could see it. Why couldn't you? Share.
That would be dangerous if everybody could see what everyone's seeing on their
Is it
screen.
showing up now, Sarah?
It is, and so hit that little in the low. Yep, there you go.
There you go. I thought this was a good quote by Edward Gibbon. The choice and command of language is a fruit of exercise. And so that says it's practice. Nobody learns how to write just by saying they're going to learn how to write. And I think a lot of the others that you've seen in this event or process have emphasized that a lot. Reading and writing is a fundamental thing that I think about. And Sarah and I, before we started today, talked a little bit about what are we reading? And I think probably in our jobs we have to read science. And I think sometimes science is difficult to read. It's not like you can pick it up and say, this really engages me. There are very few articles, I think, that happens. Many of us read fiction and nonfiction, magazines, one of the things. I personally like to read books, and what we read is fundamentally important to the process. And then why do we read? And I think understanding why we read helps us think about how we want to write. And a lot of the people that I work with in the concepts of what I call utilitarian writing, it's to gain knowledge. People are looking to become engaged and try to take away a story, try to think about why they're reading it. and that's why I write it. And then, you know, what do you read? Because what you read really informs how you write. If you are reading, well, I don't have a good example, but if you're reading Chuck Fergus, you know, you're gonna start to write like Chuck Fergus. You're gonna construct sentences like Chuck Fergus writes. If you read Leopold, you're gonna go that way. If you read Barry, and I've got some examples of these, and if you read Faulkner, I don't know who's ever gonna read it. I don't know whether any of you have really ever read Faulkner, and maybe at the end of this, I'll show you a piece. But if you wanted to understand Faulkner, Faulkner sometimes wrote some of the longest sentences I've ever tried to read. I remember in one book I tried to read of his, he had an entire page that was one sentence. And so trying to understand his punctuation, trying to understand his flow of thoughts is really problematic and painful. If you want to read an easy example of Faulkner, go read The Bear. And The Bear was written in 1942. And as I showed Sarah, the first paragraph has 3 sentences. In the first sentence in the paragraph, he was 10. And I think that was it. And then from there, it gets problematic. But pick things that you like to read and read those things, because they're going to help you become a better writer.
Before we go too far, we haven't talked a lot about sort of technical aspects of writing with our guests, but I'm you know, you brought up Faulkner and how you have a page that's an entire sentence, and so do you know, or can you surmise what would a writer, why would a writer do that? Is it a game that they're playing? Is it to challenge the reader? What's the purpose in doing something like that?
Well, um, it's style. You go back and read some of the older authors. There seemed to be a need to draw things out. I have a quote here. Oh, this is E.B. White here. E.B. White sometimes wrote some relatively long things, but in something I was reading the other day, and I think it was about Gibbons, who I just quoted before. They were challenged oftentimes by vocabulary, the diction that they were trying to follow in trying to build stories. And so when you try to read some of the older material, I find I almost have to have the dictionary right beside me to try to find the definition of words and to follow it. And so they were representing a style that they had learned. I think we've simplified writing.
I agree. And speaking, yeah.
Yeah, many things we've simplified.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just sort of fallen out of favor. And maybe that's the best way to say it. I don't necessarily want to read this to you, but I'm sure that people have been reading it while we were sitting here. And what I like about this quote and all the next 3 that I'm going to show you are simple things about the environment and about our relationship to the earth. And what it struck me about this particular one was how clean it was, how the wording flowed, the thoughts were clear, and you were able to move through it in a rather simple kind of a way. This is Leopold, and many of us read Leopold, and Leopold was a little bit more away from the clarity sometimes, but a simple language. He didn't delve into big words. He wrote in short sentences. He communicated clearly to you. And I think I've read every book that Leopold ever wrote, and I think I've read most of the essays that Leopold has ever written. And I think he's a good example of how to write well, and people follow it easily. And so I encourage you to look at Leopold. Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry came up, I think, last week or so, previous session. Wendell Berry is almost philosophical in a lot of his writing, whether he's writing about our relationship to government, whether he's writing about the land. But in losing stewardship, we lose fellowship. In other words, our connection. We become outcasts from the great neighborhood of creation. He's saying if we don't take care of the earth, we don't stay part of it. And Wendell Berry is just a fun fellow to read. And Wes Jackson, who is a contemporary of his, who has the land, I forget what it's called, it's in Kansas, the land something. And when Wes Jackson writes nice, simple, clear, declarative sentences that people interpret well. And I like Wendell Berry, and I have to admit that I've met Wendell Berry 2 or 3 times. I've actually shared stages with Wendell Berry, and he's just an engaging man to hear talk. The way he thinks, the way he writes, and I encourage you to read some Wendell Berry. And then here's somebody you don't expect to write about these kinds of things necessarily, although from a religious perspective, it's pretty amazing. The earth will not continue to offer its harvest except with faithful stewardship. We cannot say we love the land and then take steps to destroy it if for use by steps to destroy if for use by future generations. It should be it for future generations. And so I like those kinds of thoughts, and I tend to look for writing that is succinct, clear, and engaging. And so when I write, and I'll show you some examples at the end, when I write those things, I try to build that story and try to get people to come into it. And so I wanted to go ahead,
primarily
Sarah.
because of your audience too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're writing extension papers, you have to be really clear. I mean, that is a utilitarian purpose for writing. And so do you mentioned before that what you read often equates to what you write. So do you think that you mimic a style of Wendell Berry? Is that what you strive to do? And maybe not even strive, either consciously or unconsciously?
No, I think I've got a mix of those kinds of things. When I write, I try not to write too complicated a structure, although I do find, and I'll talk a little bit about Microsoft Word here in a minute, but I do find that oftentimes I'm writing at a grade level that's above where I need to be writing. You know, if I'm writing something for a newspaper, I ought to be somewhere around grade 8. And when I run the statistics on it, I might be writing 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, occasionally 17. And then you have to look at it and say, okay, how do I bring this down to a level where somebody who's got an 8th grade education or a 9th grade education can interpret it? And so I tend to want to write higher than I really should. And so I oftentimes have to bring it back down. And so here I'm talking a little bit about why I write. You know, oftentimes, and what I'm talking about today is that. And there's an important word at the end of the second bullet, and that's the word andragogy. And so in my writing, I tend to write to adults. And andragogy is the age difference between pedagogy and pedagogy is how we teach kids. And we teach kids about things because they need to learn it. Andragogy is adult learning, and andragogy is purpose-driven learning. And so I tend to write in a way that pulls people in and then try to get them to think about why they want to know this and try to give them some reason to use it or how to use it, because that's purpose-centered writing. And so in an instructional kind of thing, I'm looking at the concepts that I want to convey, the information I want to convey, and the knowledge transfer. Because the people that are reading people who I hope are reading what I write are doing it because they want to learn something. And I won't beat up science too much, but science is much more awkward writing. The sentence structures are more awkward. The drawing in of data and the interpretation of the data is much drier. I almost defy somebody to say they're going to sit down and read, and I don't mean to beat on the Journal of Forestry, but sit down and read the Journal of Forestry for an evening's entertainment. It's not what we do. You know, I read the journal by looking at the pictures and reading the captions, and then maybe there will be an article that'll pull me in for a while. But it's difficult to read. And so hopefully we're talking about writing in a way that'll help us. So when I'm writing, part of the process is planning. How do I plan out what I'm going to write? And my research oftentimes and my writing oftentimes looks at private forest landowners. So for me, that's who. And then I have to think about what do I want to tell them? And how does that fit in to where we are? And so I often look for a seasonal connection or an event connection or something that says that what I'm going to put out there is timely. And then I have to think about where it goes. You know, oftentimes it shows up in newspapers. And then I've got values in there. And values is one of those things that I'm talking about. What do they value, but also their personal values, because there's some things that I'd like to write about that I know aren't going to necessarily set with the way people look at the world that I look at. And so how do I talk about climate change when I know that some percentage of the population isn't interested in that or believe it? And then what do I need to tell them? You know, if I think who, what, where, values, and needs, then that begins to frame for me who I'm going to write, what I'm going to write about. And then where do I write from? Well, I write from my personal experience. I try to engage their personal experience. I might put a story in it to help them think about it. Where is it going to go and everything else. I think about all those kinds of things when I'm trying to put things together.
I don't want to interrupt your
Sure.
flow, but I did have an anonymous question here in the chat.
Yeah.
What is a press release? And do you want to talk a little bit more about that and what it means?
I don't have a press release in here, but a press release is usually the who, what, where. I'm going to have an event, and I'm going to invite people to that. That's a press release. I'm trying to get them to think about coming.
And those are usually only like one page. I mean, those have to be really succinct.
They're short.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to talk about. This is why you got to come. This is where it's going to be. And it always drives me nuts. And when people write press releases, they say there will be a meeting at. What the meeting is. You know, think about how I can say these things in succinct kind of ways. And press releases should be succinct because people want to know when, where, and what. And it will be? No, it is going to be. It is on June 26th, 10 o'clock. Be there or be square. You know? And so help people think about those kinds of things. Is there anything else there, Sarah?
Not yet. Oh, follow up. Is a press release the same thing as a news release?
No, a news release in my book is I'm telling you something about. It's like a short article in a newspaper. We call them news releases at university. A press release is an event. A news release is this is about blackberries, or this is about firewood, or I want you to read this and take something away from it. Okay, and so it's news release / article. You know, I'm putting it in a daily newspaper. It's a news release and it's got information in it that you might want to take home and use as knowledge. Does that help clarify that?
I think so. We'll see if anything pops up in the chat.
All right. And so one of the things that I heard somebody say in one of the sessions so far was, you know, do you create an outline? I find it's useful to create an outline. And sometimes I'll do a formal outline, actually number it 1, 2, A, B, I, and work down through it so that I understand the flow that I'm trying to get. Sometimes it'll be rougher than that. Sometimes it'll just be key words because I feel comfortable enough with the subject that I'll deal with it. And sometimes it's almost conceptual that there'll be some key words, there'll be some short sentences, but I still always put together an outline. And then sometimes I say, I don't understand this well enough, and I need to go do some research. And my favorite research tool right now is Google Scholar. And I don't know
It's
whether most of
awesome.
you use it. Yeah, it's just
It's
absolutely
fantastic.
amazing. Type in Google Scholar, look at the subject you're looking at, and if you're not tied to a research university, maybe you don't have as much access to some things that are listed there. But you probably know somebody who is at a research university who can get access to those publications for you. And I'll give a little sidebar here. Oftentimes, when you see things that are in resources like that, there'll be HTMLs. And if you try to save an HTML, it's almost impossible to read. If you print it to a PDF in your Microsoft choice in printing, print HTMLs to PDFs, and they take on the right structure. And so they look as if they were on the screen, and then you can save a PDF. And that was a little trick that I learned by chance only a couple months ago, that you could actually do that. And so that's one of those helpful little things I hope that somebody can use. I write drafts. The other day, somebody said I write from the beginning to end. I tend to write maybe by paragraphs, from beginning of a paragraph to the end of a paragraph. And if I'm really motivated, I might finish a whole piece. And then I'll go back and do it again and edit it. One of the things I often wrote on student papers was read aloud. If you read a piece of something you've written to yourself without reading it aloud, you don't hear the flow. You don't pick up structural mistakes, and you may not even figure out that you've missed some points. And so by reading it aloud, that's just really, really, really important.
I agree. And I want to pick up what Nancy wrote in the chat. This was in reference to something we talked about before, but I think it's relevant here. She said, regarding Faulkner or even James Joyce, she said, remember that one doesn't think in sentences. And that might tie to this, because you don't, when you're just sort of in your head, you're not kind of doing that kind of communication that you then read. So if you can read it out loud, you're kind of going into a different medium or mode of communication.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the next point I have is read it to someone else. And I don't care who that person is, but you need to read it out loud to someone else. And maybe you just watch them for the body language or those telltale signs where they're not following what you're talking about. And then you have to go back and think about it. But you'll also pick up you left out words. You're going to pick up that you have the wrong word. Maybe you need a preposition. Maybe you've got the wrong modifier. You have to think about that. And so that's all about sharing. And one of the things that I think is really, really important there is share and accept input, accept input, accept input. That's probably one of the most painful things that you go through. When somebody picks up that red pen, which I refuse to use, I always use blue, and they begin to mark up your work, it's almost insulting sometimes. But there's a lot to learn there. One, you learn how other people read your writing. You learn something about editing. And I think learning to edit your own work and somebody else's work is just absolutely necessary. Nancy and I exchange stuff quite often when we're working on the PFA magazine, and she'll beat me up on something, and maybe I'll find something that she missed, but not too often. But learning to do that is really, really important. Edit other people's work. When you're reading something, you're reading a magazine or a newspaper, pick out a couple paragraphs and edit it. It's amazing how many mistakes there are in newspapers. particularly now, it's just every day I pick up an article and I read it, and there's something wrong, and so it helps you be critical, and that helps your own writing.
What I've noticed, because I either I get interviewed a lot for various newspaper and magazine articles, and what I've noticed, especially now, and even, so I've only been doing this about 20 years, and even 20 years ago to today, how rushed these guys and gals are to get a piece out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, just taking the time, I find when I edit others' writings, when someone sends me a piece to edit, I'm like, they did this last night, and you can just tell how rushed it was. So I kind of want to push on this with accepting input and sort of the process. And how long do you spend on a piece? How far in advance is this process? Who's your editing support? Do you
Who's
lean on
my
the
editing support?
Yeah.
My editing support are two or three people right now. I work very closely with Allison Muth in the Center for Private Forest. So Allison and I often exchange pieces, and so she'll edit for me, and I edit for her. I do editing for Dave Jackson. Dave Jackson does some editing for me, and so those are people that I exchange with. My wife reads things and says, this doesn't sound right to me, and she'll help me. When I was at the university, it was maybe a little bit easier to find people to read things. Now that I've moved on, my it's a little bit more narrow than it used to be. But I look for people to read things, and I try to write far enough in advance that it's not due today. It's due 4 days from now, and so that I've got something finished and I can get it in so it's on time. I really like to get things in on time. If somebody tells me they want something on Friday, it'll be there Friday, and hopefully it'll be good for them. But that's how I get that done. The other thing I do, and again, this is something that last week, I think it was, I'm hitting the wrong key. I use different, tools in my writing. I have Strunk and White at home here, and so I look at Strunk and White. I've got a textbook from elementary school that I used, that I still use. And I told a story that I found some in the dumpster at the University Park one day, and I grabbed 2 or 3 copies, and so I still have them. Zinser's book is really good. You're going to get a copy of that, and so use it. If you get on the web, you'll find that there are a couple short abbreviated Zinser kinds of things. Zinser's 10 top tips and Zinser's personal 10 top tips are really good. They talk about brevity. They talk about superfluous words. They help you think about how you're going to deal with that. I use collaborators. When you're writing in science, you're always using collaborators. You very seldom get your own name on a paper by yourself. But look to people for ideas, observations, seasonal kinds of things. Just look for what you ought to be writing about. I do write on a computer. I like the fact that it tells me I can't spell. I like the fact that it has synonyms for me. It picks up jargon. It looks at my technical skills. And again, where I was trying to get to was this whole idea of Microsoft Word. I don't know how many of you use Key 7 on your computer if you've got Microsoft. This is a really powerful aid. Jeff Larkin last time said he doesn't like it because people just sort of accept the edits and go on. If you want to be critical about it, learn to use those edits to help you write better. And you can challenge it. You don't have to accept what they say. Think about what you want to do. And so this is just a screen capture, but there's some goals. Passive sentences, you want to be under 15%. And we'll talk a little bit about passive sentences in a second. You typically want to be in that 0 to 60 range for grades, reading ease. I have trouble hitting that sometimes. If you're looking at grade scales, you want to be somewhere in that 7 to 11. 8's a really good number. And so I don't know how many of you use it, but it's certainly something to look at. Have you used it, Sarah?
I have, but you know what? Not for a long time, and that's a really good reminder to do that, especially for some more a lot of the outreach articles that I do, and I have not applied this tool to that, but I will now.
Yeah, I find it really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and then this was one of my pet peeves is active versus passive voice. And if you read the Journal of Forestry, there's a lot of passive voice. And in the opinion of others, this is something you should try to avoid. There's some sentences you can't change to an active voice, but look at them. And the Microsoft Word, if you have it set up correctly, will point out passive verb usage. Academic writing is heavy with it, and my admonition is use it sparingly. It's weak and it's awkward. And so, just an example: an active sentence, the sentence subject performs the verb's action. And a passive one, the game was won when a home run was hit by Jerry. Oh, it makes you yawn. Jerry won the game by hitting a home run. It's much more forceful. It's much cleaner, and people can read and understand what you're trying to accomplish there. And there's a really good reference there on Grammarly. And I don't know whether any of you ever visit Grammarly, but Grammarly also has a reading function, so it can read and help you see structure in your writing. It makes writing a little bit mechanical, but you still have your voice, and you don't have to listen to it, but it helps you see some of the things that other people see that might be issues. And so I strongly encourage people to do that at least a couple times in what you do. And so
Hey Jim, hold on
yeah.
before you go on. So I had a question about accessing that F7 dialog box there in Word. Do you mean Control F7? What's the key?
No, just F7. Just an F7 key. You don't do a control, you don't do a function, you don't do anything. If you look at your F7 key on your computer, there's no function key underneath it. There's nothing on it. It's just an F7 key. And you just pull your piece of writing up, hit your F7 key. Now, you may have to go into your options to set it up to make it work, but play around with it a little bit. There's some really good tutorials online to help you figure out what you want to do with that piece of information.
It may depend on computer. So I know on my old one it was F7. On my new one, F7 turns off my Wi-Fi. So,
well, do you need to do a little looking around then?
Yeah. So and in my new version of Word too, I think it's under Editor. They kind of switch some things around. So we'll play around with that. But I think that's
yeah.
Just to say, it may not always be F7. I mean,
Okay.
it might be on many computers, but it may not be all of them.
Well, the only 5 I own right now, that's where it is. So I others had brought in some of their writing, and so I picked a couple things. This is one I wrote in June or July this year, and this is just the beginning paragraph. And I did tell a story here. I wanted people to think about why they might go pick blackberries, and then this article rolled into the function of blackberries in forest regeneration, and then brought people back out into the berry patch so that they would go visit it. And blackberries were always a big part of my life as a kid growing up. As a kid, one of summer's highlights was blackberry season. It was a big deal. We went to the mountains and frequented those thorny patches. The buckets of berries and expectations of pies, dumplings, and preserves, not to mention the frequent handful of freshly picked jewels, more than offset the frequent pricks and jabs. It's almost blackberry season in much of Pennsylvania. August is just around the corner. So again, from an andragogy kind of thing, I wanted to pull people in And then I wanted to tell them why blackberries were important in forest systems and how they contributed to forest regeneration. And then I brought them back out. And so from a story kind of perspective, this does set up a story. And then I was able to move on. This was one that I wrote, and I won't necessarily read it, but this was about the idea of green. And the original title was It's Tough Being Green. And it was changed to Dappled Light and Shades of Green. But I started off by the fact that green is what we see in the forest, and trying to get people to think about how green light doesn't necessarily support vegetation, but it's the other wavelengths that bring you into it. And so I brought it down. The next time you walk in the woods, think about Kermit in the Shades of Green. So I built a link in there to build something that they had heard on television. You know, it's tough being green. Enjoy the shady places, explore how forest grows, and etc. And if you can link the beginning and the end together in a way that you can put your story that you want to tell in the middle, I think it's a pretty effective way to write. I think we're coming up on the end here, Sarah.
Yeah, we still got about 5-10 minutes.
Okay. This is one that Allison asked me to write. And if you can find a copy of it, or you want a copy of it, this was really a fun one. Much research is sought to predict masting years when big acorn crops occur, shed light on poor years or early acorn abortion, abscission like we're seeing this season. This one, I thought I understood how acorns grew and matured. And when I started to write this, I started to see that I had a hole in my story. And so I went back into the literature, and I went all the way back into the 30s to understand acorn formation. And I always said that it took 2 years to make a red oak acorn. Well, it actually takes 3 growing seasons. And so there was more to this than I had thought. And trying to figure out how to put this story together was really complicated. And so writing is both informative for yourself, for others, and yourself, because it requires that you put together the information in a way that's complete. Even something as simple as that, you know.
Well, and so our committee got together a couple days ago, and in preface to this session, and that's exactly what came up, which was, in order to truly understand something, you know, teaching, of course, they always say that about teaching, right? If you really want to find out if you know a topic, try to teach it. And I think writing is sort of along those same lines of, if you want to know, if you truly understand a subject, try and write about it and explain it to somebody else, especially in the written word, because it's not as easy as you might think.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you know, you often find holes in your own understanding that you can then fill through that process.
Yeah, and you know, and one of the things that I think helps with that is even journaling. You know, and I know that you wanted to talk about journaling somewhere in this process, and you did to a certain extent. But when you journal things and you maybe write in there, I don't understand this, or I think this is how it works. Well, then that's a tip that you need to go look further. You know, if all you're doing is journaling what you see and you're not raising questions back to yourself, you're missing the opportunity to expand your understanding. The other thing that I do in my writing is I just sort of list subjects out sometimes. You know, what's a seasonal subject? What's something I've seen? What is a question somebody's asked me that I can then write about? Because it goes back to that andragogy. I want to write about something somebody wants to read. And I don't want to write a book, although I've come close several times. I just don't want to do that. I want to write something that people can pick up and say, well, that's really interesting, and add to their base knowledge and use it as part of their experience.
So Nancy puts here, she says, one of my helpful hints in my own writing is to put a piece down and come back to it later. And I know that's absolutely true for me. What I found is there's a book called Why We Sleep. And
Hmm.
it all comes back to there are absolute like specific biological reasons of why that works and what your brain does while it's asleep, like building synapses and putting pieces together of why that's so important, you know, to sleep on something and figure it out later. So I think that everybody should probably do that when they write.
I think that's really useful. I almost always read something 3 or 4 times after I've written it, and so it usually has a couple nights in it, but sometimes I just want to get it done and
True.
get it on.
Yep.
And so it's writing. Writing is work. I'm always surprised when people say I like to write. Uh, it's hard. I think there are some people like Chuck Fergus and others who are disciplined enough to do it every day, and it's part of what they do, and it's an essential part of their life. Most of us write when we've got an obligation to write. We don't do it because, geez, I just feel inspired to sit down and write every day. Uh, but when you start to write and you start to feel that you're putting down words in a way that makes sense, and people respond back that this is interesting, or I really enjoyed that, those are the rewards you get from it. And I
Yeah,
encourage people to
Sandy.
write. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so just to follow up on another thought, Sandy mentions that Zinzer has another book called Writing to Learn, which is also kind of in the same process of um, in order to truly understand something or learn something yourself, writing is a key to it. And I agree. Like another reason that we put this series together was because, just like you said, I write when I have to, because I have to do something for a journal article or communicate something scientific to an audience. And it's not, I don't sit down and write because I love it. But I will say that this series has really helped me embrace the process. I've taken a new perspective to it, and even though I'm still only going to write when I have to, it's become more enjoyable. We're still in the early stages. We'll see if that continues. But I have gained a whole new appreciation for it, which is
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Um,
I agree.
so we've got about 4 or 5 minutes here. Do you have another? I think you have one more
No, that was
slide,
all
right?
I had, but
That was it.
I'll put the bear up for you, just in case somebody wants to read the bear while if there are any questions or anything. He was 10.
That's the shortest one. Everything
That's the
else is.
shortest sentence in the whole thing.
Yeah. Let's see if I got anything else here. Oh well, maybe while we're waiting, one of these last questions. So, do you have any tips for aspiring writers, especially on writing about forests, wildlife, or outdoors?
Well, write about something you know something about. You know, uh, maybe when you're in the forest, you're looking at something. Maybe just standing there looking at a red maple tree. Take some time and write about it. Think about what you could write about that tree. A descriptive piece. I remember this is going back a long, long time ago. In freshman English, I had to write an in-class essay one time, and I described the classroom where I was taking the essay. And it was the only A I ever got in writing in Penn State. but 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 putting a picture or something that you see into a verbal context. And in natural resources, we've got lots of opportunities to do that. You know, what do we love about what we do? Well, if we get to have lunch by a stream every day. Well, you're sitting next to that stream. Streams are just amazingly interesting to think about. A leaf falls in the stream and the leaf goes down and goes over the riffles and it gets stuck in the riffles. And you could write about that. You know, describing what we see and describing what we do are easy experiential kinds of things to write about. And maybe nobody will ever read it, but it's what you would put in a journal. if you hunt, you could write about a hunting experience. You could write about following tracks. It's just amazing what you can think you could write about. If it comes into your mind, you can tell a story about it. You can write about it. It
Well,
doesn't
and
have
that
to be
practice,
long,
well, and
huh?
that practice will certainly help apply, then to when, assignments that
Mm-hmm.
you have to complete. So yeah, I agree. I agree.
You know,
Um, well, I don't have any other questions here or anything else in the chat, but are you going to stick around while we talk
yeah,
to Nancy and Steve?
sure.
Uh, so Nancy says, use your curiosity. I agree. So if you guys do have a question for Jim, please feel free to throw it in the chat. And I think we'll transition here to start talking to Nancy and Steve. So I'm going to ask them and Jim, you did a great. So I want everyone to know that this was Jim's first Zoom presentation, and I think you did a great job. Fantastic.
Thanks.
Um, Thanks for doing that. So there's Nancy, and I know I saw Steve on here.
Yep, Steve is here.
What time is it out there?
7:59.
Oh, that's not too
But
bad.
I'm all coffeeed up and ready to go.
All right, fantastic. Good, good, good. Well, so I thought I made an executive decision yesterday that I thought it would be more effective to have a conversation with you guys both at the same time. So you each edit a magazine or I guess you could call Forestry Source a magazine. Is it a paper, newspaper? What would you call the Forestry Source?
We call it the official newspaper of the Society of American Foresters.
Newspaper. All right. So I thought it would be fun to have a conversation with you guys at the same time. And I know that you each have some slides and some various things to share. I also want folks to know, Nancy, you shared some guidelines for Pennsylvania forests that's now up on rothrocksaf.org. And we'll also share that with with everyone after this session. But just so you guys know that that's up on rothrocksaf.org.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. But let's just start out and talk a little bit about the various publications there. So Nancy, tell us about what you do with Pennsylvania Forests, maybe a little bit about the publication, what you're after.
Well, I'm one of the co-editors, although we divide up tasks for Pennsylvania Forest. Pennsylvania Forest is the magazine of the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. It goes out to members and prospective members. We publish probably between 1,200 and 1,500-ish magazines quarterly. It's a full color magazine, and it is totally run by volunteers, which is pretty amazing. The PFA supports the graphic design, it supports the publication, the printing, and it supports the mailing to the tune of about $40,000 a year.
Wow.
But all the rest of the work is done by volunteers. All our writers are volunteers. We do not pay for photographs. And without the volunteers, it would just fall into the netherworld. It just would not work. But we're very appreciative of all those people.
How long have you played the role of editor there with Pennsylvania Forest?
I was on the committee before I was editor, and I edited a few issues before I was officially the editor, but I would say probably 6-7 years. And maybe it helps you to know that my graduate work is in forest ecology, but as an undergraduate, I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in biology and a minor in honors English. So this makes both sides of my education come together. And that is comparatively a rare bird, I would say. And Pennsylvania Forest was commercially edited for a while, and it on the English side it was good, on the forestry side it was not good. And so having that combination is very important to us.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Steve, same question to you. So you edit the Forestry source. It's SAF's publication. What do you want to tell us about that publication and your role there?
Well, I've been an editor of some sort for from 2004 on. Before that, I contributed an occasional article, all on volunteer basis. Until then, when in 2004, I worked as a features editor about half-time, and at the same time, I was teaching forestry and wildlife classes at a community college out here in Portland, or near Portland, about half-time. 2008, went full-time with SAF and cut back my teaching. And ever since then, I've been editor of The Source, which goes to about 10,000 SAF members around the country and a few overseas in Canada and elsewhere. Let's see, what else can I tell you about it?
I see your name on a lot of those articles and a lot of those pictures. You, how do you always write a piece in The Source, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Most of the articles in The Source are written by me or by Andrea Watts, who's our associate editor. We, like Nancy, we rely on volunteers who are foresters, SAF members, and others to contribute articles. I usually ask for contributions when I see a good article, but I can talk about this later about the kinds of articles I'm looking for.
Well, that's the next question. So if you want to go ahead and flow into that, and then what are you looking for? What are you trying to get folks to write for you?
Well, I'll try to share my screen. I've got some notes.
Okay.
Let's see if this works. Can you see it?
Nope. But you turned off your camera.
Well, okay, here we go. Let's try that. I don't see anybody.
Yes.
Do you see me?
No, but I see your
Okay.
screen, which is good.
All right. Okay. Sorry about the technical glitch. I don't see I see you, Sarah, but I'll just say that, as I said, most articles are written by me or Andrea, and I do accept articles from others, but it's important to contact me before you write, because it may be disappointing to you. I may not be able to accept your article. Let's see, I'm switching back and forth here. Okay. I do accept letters to the editor without query, commentary with a query, and a commentary, I have to say, even a letter to the editor is basically an oral position statement, something I require of my students in the current issues in forest resources class that I teach. A commentary is a position statement in which you express your opinion on an issue, but this is most important, support your position with facts and references. It's okay to express your opinion, but if readers don't know who you are and that you're an expert in the subject area, you need to provide some background for them. I should have mentioned I have degrees in forestry and journalism, which I guess is how I ended up as editor of a forestry newspaper. Let's see, I can go to my next slide. I hope you can see that. Some of the articles Science and Technology, GIS for Foresters, and Field Tech. Most of the Field Tech columns I write myself. That's where I obtain a new piece of software or hardware and test it in the field and then write about my experience. Thus, I typically talk about the strengths and weaknesses of a new handheld or a new app. I've occasionally had field tech articles contributed by others, and I welcome that. I'd like to have more perspective and more experience in the forestry source from folks who are using those tools in the field in ways I don't. Again, if you'd like to if you have an idea for any of these articles, contact me and we can talk it out and decide how best to cover it, or whether I've covered that before and it's not time to redo that. SAF News, articles about SAF activities, and I focus on, I'll read it on the screen, activities and accomplishments by members, chapters, or groups that, and this is important, that highlight good forestry, enhance public understanding of forests and forest management, and provide service to SAF and society. And many of those are Foresters Fund, articles about Foresters Fund projects. SAF's Foresters Fund, as you probably know, support such projects. Maybe it's a walk in the woods with school kids. And I love to promote the Foresters Fund and the people who develop projects with, at least in part, with funding from SAF.
This is one of them. We received a Foresters Fund
good.
grant to put this together.
Gee, maybe somebody ought to write about it.
Yeah, they probably should.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I
a
think
question
I
I have
might.
for you. So I'm writing this with the Allegheny Division, an article. How often do you see article? So could I reuse that article even though it's published already? How often do you republish things that you see that you like that might be in other local chapter or division communications? Do you do that often or try to avoid that?
I don't try to avoid it at all, and I've often used articles that have been published in regional or state or division or local newsletters. I welcome that. If you've got an article that is of interest to members across the country, I'd be glad to publish it, and vice versa. Although, if you use an article from the source, you're perfectly welcome to. Maybe many of your readers already have seen it. Every edition of the source has at least several articles that are contributed by people who aren't SAF members. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year, for example, I use an article or an essay from the Center for International Forestry Research, or CFOR. They welcome the use of their articles in the forestry source. So I like to bring in new perspectives and new ideas through articles from other publications.
Great. Well, so I guess same question to you, Nancy. Do you want to share what you're looking for and what kinds of articles you tend to publish, and are there any sort of themes that you're after?
Oh, yes. Here, let me see if I can share my screen.
Should be able to take over. And Steve, I'm gonna try and get you to get your video back on so we can see you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I turned it off. I thought I had just turned off sharing the screen. Here we go.
Nancy, are you able
So
to share?
Sarah, I can't share my screen yet while the other participant is sharing.
Okay, so Steve, you got to stop sharing, and then Nancy can go.
Stop sharing. Okay, I think I did. I thought I had paused it, but I now stopped it.
All right.
Sorry about that.
So here's a Word document. Because we're such a volunteer organization, it makes it much easier for us if we theme each issue. And then once we decide, the committee decides on what the new theme is going to be for the next issue. In fact, we plan about 4 issues ahead of ourselves. So we're already planning into 2021 at this point, well into 2021. Then we ask writers that we know, or institutions, or groups that we know who are interested in that theme to submit articles to us. But we're open to anyone submitting an article, because maybe you have 5 articles on one theme in the issue, and if that is not of interest to a particular reader, then that issue doesn't grab hold for the reader. So we want shorter articles to add in addition to the theme. So this will go out to all of you. These are our previous themes for 10 plus years that we have covered. And of course, we don't want to cover things, you know, too close together. Although we might go back and revisit, for example, springtime this year, we will emphasize riparian buffers.
Hey Nancy, can you zoom in with there, and so because looking at both pages at the same time is hard for us to read on that screen. I think if you go to view and like 100%.
Okay. I don't know whether I can, I can back out of here and do it probably.
You can use the slider at the bottom right to increase the size of the view.
Excellent.
That's a good idea.
Thank you, Steve.
There you go.
Okay.
And so this is how you keep, so Nancy, this is how you keep track of everything. This is the official, is this the official repository and catalog of Pennsylvania
this is
Forest
as
Magazine?
official as it gets.
Okay.
Our committee is very flexible. And so someone has said, you know, Nancy, I don't know what the articles were in 2016. And so I just went into the issues and wrote this up. We are at the moment working with a North Central Pennsylvania Conservancy intern who is listing every article that is in each one of these issues. So that will be available to us too.
So just from my, so I work with, I keep track of newsletters for a Pennsylvania chapter of the Chestnut Foundation and also the Chestnut Magazine, and we have TACF. We have a large ongoing Excel spreadsheet to keep track of everything, and you know, who wrote it, what the title was, you know, what page it's on. So just, I think it's another aspect that I never thought about until I started trying to keep track of what was published in a given issue. Steve,
Yes.
I'm curious, Steve, I'm curious, how do you keep, do you keep some sort of library of, or database of articles that you've written or themes like this? And if so, is it Word, is it Excel? How do you keep track of everything to know what topic you've written on when? Oh, I don't know if Steve can hear me. Uh-oh.
Were you asking of me, Sarah?
Yeah, I was asking you, do you keep a database of articles?
Was taking notes.
Yeah.
Well, I do have an editorial calendar that is a little less detailed than Nancy's, but because we're a newspaper, we try in general to cover what's news at the time. So often when I begin working on an issue, an edition of the source, I'm looking for news stories. That's something that's current, like the wildfires out west. I've written about them in the October edition. So we do have every other month. That's the source is a monthly. Every other month or so, we have a special edition that's aimed at a particular topic. The October edition, in addition to coverage of the wildfires, we had planned long in advance and a special edition on the future of forestry education. And I interviewed a handful of forestry school deans around the country. We talked to other instructors. So we've got, I think, 8 or 9 articles just on trends in forestry education, and a lot of focus on how schools are dealing with the COVID pandemic. But my co-editor and I, Andrea, have basically a Word document that we both share, and we have the articles we're working on listed there and any other details that either of us need to know. So simple Word document, an Excel spreadsheet would work just fine as well.
And I would say that I keep a chart for every issue of the Pennsylvania Forest Magazine. And it probably has 60 to 70 different items on it for each particular issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes all the time until the issue goes out.
Yeah, there's a lot of background work that folks don't see in doing these publications.
Right,
Um,
because I also have to include Pennsylvania Forestry Association news and activities and things that happen in the state and obituaries, and all those go into that chart.
Well, the same thing in the Forestry Source. You guys publish
Yes.
those kinds of things too.
Yeah.
Well, so the audiences are pretty different though for these two different publications. So Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, but yours is more of the private forest landowner, and then Steve, you're the professional forester. So right? So I'm
Yes.
curious, like how, I wonder if you could compare and contrast maybe the two publications and what you need to do in working with those two different audiences. And Nancy, I'm going to ask you to do that first.
Sure. So the Pennsylvania Forestry Association's board of directors by bylaw is composed of 3 groups evenly distributed. One is academia and government. One is industry. So a third of the members are from industry. And then a third of the members are from the public. And the public includes private forest landowners. But when you look at our audience and our ability to expand our audience, we look very closely at private forest landowners. And that's actually what our main audience is, although we pay attention to these other, academia, government, and industry. And it's often academia, government, and industry who helps us deliver a message to private forest landowners. But this is primarily not a professional audience. This is an audience who varies in their ability to understand what we're trying to communicate to them. So we have to hit many levels. And Jim talked about the Fleisch reading ease measurements. I have published, when emerald ash borer came into Pennsylvania, some comparatively technical articles that actually had footnotes to them and things like that, because we thought it was very important for people to know about it. But I would not say that those are the most successful articles.
So what is the most successful article? Do tell.
Well, do we have time for me to share my screen?
Oh, well, let's go to Steve and talk about audience, and
Right.
then we'll go. So one of the next question is the errors and pitfalls and what works well. So we'll address that next. So Steve, what about the audience for the Forestry Source?
Well, as you might expect, almost all readers of the source are professional foresters, Society of American Foresters members. That said, there's great diversity within that group. We have students just coming out of college all the way to retirees. Folks around the country have different interests based on forests in their and the forest industry in their region. We have academics, procurement foresters, and so on. So I try to write a range of articles that appeal not just to all of them, but sometimes to a specific segment of them. And hopefully along the way, people in other segments or specialties will learn something. So I'm writing just for foresters.
What I find that interesting about the geography, Nancy, you're very specific to Pennsylvania, and I know when I pick up the Forestry Source, like the things that I tend to gravitate are the more geographically relevant for me, and so I can see how that would be a real challenge to deal with such a wide variety of topics. So Nancy, you may have a more varied audience in terms of background and understanding, but Steve, you're dealing with a much bigger geography that you have to make sure that interests everybody doing that. So cool.
And I have to add that Andrea and I try consciously to cover stories from a range of regions. One of the criticisms we've heard most is that we focus too much on the West. And that's logical in a way, because so much of the news stories, controversies over forest management and wildfires are 2 examples, are occurring in the West. But we do try to reach out to other regions and cover forestry and the industry in the South and the Northeast and so on. With this special education issue, I made it a point to gather or to talk with professionals, professors and deans at universities around the country. So we've got they're scattered all over the country, and So I do try to be aware of the different regional interests, but of course I can't always cover them in every issue.
Well, yeah, then it would be a much larger publication.
I wish it were.
Oh yeah, yeah. So Nancy, you were going to tell us about successful articles and share
Yeah,
your screen. You want to show us
right.
what?
So it has to be, of course, something that appeals to a forest landowner. Let me share this. So every issue, when we finally get done with things, we have a PDF of the complete issue. And this is from 2017, the special feature. The theme was harvesting your woods. And we had the offer from an industrial forester to write about questions that foresters get that just freak them out. They were the red flags of forestry. And so Matt Sampson, who works for Forestlands Incorporated, volunteered to survey other foresters and write us this article. And it was terrifically successful, so much so that we had inquiries from other states, for example, from New York State, could republish this article. And part of the reason was that it was so successful is that it was essentially sort of an interview article, question and answer. It was written with some humor, but it was also written with very great accuracy. And people really loved this article, and it was informative. We got notes from individual forest landowners that we had hit some of the questions that they had, and now they realized that they were out of line in how they looked at that question. And I have another thing. You can see this is the final shape that the article looked like in the magazine, so that the graphic design is also important in communicating what you're trying to find. And I was the one who had to go look for this photograph of the forester because I wanted the red flag in it. And actually this image is from Germany. It's really hard sometimes to find the accurate visual cue to bring in the audience, because audiences look at the pictures first. So
well, even Jim was saying that about picking up the Journal of Forestry, looking at the pictures, and I mean the background too. There's a lot that goes in the design and putting that in the back.
Right. And so
Nancy,
sure.
I have a question for you about obtaining those photos and what you need to do to get permission to use them.
I go to Google and I look for an image, and Google gives you the choice to ask for images that have copyrights or are not copywritten. It gives you about 5 different choices. One of the choices is, do you want to alter the image? And are you a nonprofit? Because some things can be shared with a nonprofit that will be not be shared for profit. And I'm very careful, and you see there's a photo credit on here. I always try and credit the photographs because we're not paying for them, and I think people should get rewarded in some particular way.
Yeah.
But I'm very careful at that, yeah. And I have sometimes found a photograph and know the source of the photograph, and it might not be in Pennsylvania, it might be in Kentucky or something like that, and have emailed the photographer or the newspaper that it appeared in and ask if we may use it, if we may have permission to use it. And they have always said, absolutely yes. But let's make it a point to ask first. I'm very careful about that.
A violation of copyright law if you use one without permission.
Absolutely, right. So we're careful with that.
Right.
Nancy, how often do you rely on the authors to provide you with photographs? Are you always having to track down something that will work, or do authors?
I would say about 50% of the photographs that I get, I can use, particularly when it comes to a front page image. Let me just back up here a little bit to the beginning. This image, this is a winter issue. It's very hard. This is a big image, and it's very sharp, and these are hard to come by. It's a vertical image also, and I can show you on the internal page for the table of contents. Here is what that image actually looks like. It's a landscape image that is high enough resolution that we could use portrait, and so it's been cropped. And there you see the CCO public domain, the credit for it, and an explanation of what it's about and why it relates to the image theme, the issue theme. I was just going to stop sharing this if I have a moment, and then go to the original manuscript that I got. I think this is this. Here it is. So this was the original manuscript, and it has both my and Jim Finley's edits on it. And when you look at the article, and when you have it in front of you, you will see that this is much shorter than what the article turned out to be. The article was 2 full pages. There were additional questions. The questions are not in the same order in the article that they are in this first draft. And so when you submit something to us, as Jim said, you have to be willing to accept our suggestions. We can argue about it sometimes, but Jim looks at it and I look at it, and we come to some sort of conclusion. And then we hope that the author is willing to accept these changes.
I like that Jim's is blue. In tradition with the blue pen, it still made it there. Well, how often do you encounter authors who recalcitrant authors? I guess do you encounter them who really
in the issue that we are working right now, which comes from a state institution? We have a couple of articles that were submitted by one author who would not permit any changes.
Wow.
And they're not in this issue.
Okay. Makes sense though. And Steve, how about you? I mean, so you must go through a similar process of editing, and do you have this similar kind of process where you engage in as hands-on as Nancy and Jim?
Yes, even between Andrea and I, we share each other's articles, we edit each other's articles and discuss changes. The same with contributors from outside. We routinely will edit an article with track changes on, as Nancy did, to show them the proposed changes. Most of the time, the authors are okay with that because we're trying to help refine and polish their work. Occasionally, rarely, they'll dispute a point, and we always listen to their concerns and make undo changes if it's appropriate. So it's a back and forth process.
How long does it take you from the start of putting together a forestry source to the end? How long is that process? I mean, because editing takes a long time. Communicating with these authors. I mean, are you finish one issue and you're starting the next one, and it takes you that long? I mean, how intense is this as an editor?
The planning process is long. I'm working on or thinking about articles now for the December edition and even beyond. Most of the work occurs within a month or so of my date with the printer. By then, say 3 weeks before we go to the printer, I really want to have all of the articles at least in draft form. And that gives me time and Andrea time to go through the editing process. So most of the hands-on work goes on very soon or very near the printer deadline. But we're planning out for many issues, and I'm now thinking about special issues for 2021.
And then Nancy, same question to you. I mean, this finding pictures.
I would say it's a very similar process. In our instance where we're working with a graphic designer, we probably go through 3 to 5 draft versions before we come out with the way it's going to look on the page. It just goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And they're big files. And Jim and I both work at these final drafts until we get it right. There are magazines out there in forestry, and I resonate with Jim saying, you read an article and you think, oh, what were they thinking when they edited that way? We won't mention those, but ours are right when we get done. They're right in the language, and they're right in the forestry facts too.
That's what all editors say.
Well, but I think that shows, and kind of going back to a statement I made earlier, where I see there's this push now to get things out so quickly and so rapidly, and I think quality suffers. And you guys, you don't have the same, time constraints that say a daily newspaper would, but you guys actually take the time, even though it is an incredible amount of time, you guys take that to make sure that it's a quality product that you're putting out there. I have a question. Sandy asks both of you, is your work done with your publication team and writers? Is that all done remotely? Do you have any in-person? I mean, and so let's just, COVID notwithstanding, is this usually a remote process, or do you get together in person at all?
For me, it's been, I've been working from my home since the late 90s, actually mid 90s. And so it's always been remote. Andrea works from home. And of course, now with COVID, all SAF employees are working from home for the most part. But remote is great. It's with the advent of fast internet connections, it makes it quite easy to work from anywhere in the world.
And you're in Oregon, right?
Yes.
And where's Andrea?
She lives in Washington State.
Okay. And Nancy,
we get a lot of flack because the source is produced by Northwesterners.
Well, we also work remotely. Our committee meets face to face once a year. And that's when we hash out the themes and that are going to be in future issues. And our committee also works with the PFA website, with Facebook, with electronic newsletter. So the magazine is only part of this.
I'd like to add that SAF meetings, in the past when we had in-person meetings, Andrea and I would use those opportunities to connect with SAF members, readers, and ask them about the forestry source, especially how we might improve it overall, but also for article ideas and tips.
It's really important to keep your ears open all the time as things change and you get a new idea. Oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, you want to keep it fresh for sure, especially for people I bet have read both publications for decades now, right? I mean, that's you can have a long time readership. Well, one of the main reasons we wanted to invite you guys to close these sessions was so our chapter, the Rothrock chapter, held the winter meeting this past February, and one of the common themes that really kept coming up was the public, the general public, they don't know what foresters do. They think that we're just out there cutting down trees and logging, and I think they equate foresters with loggers. And I think one of the things that we had hoped in creating this the series was to encourage people to write, to give them tools to want to write and write well, to describe and share the love of their profession and what they do. And so, you know, Nancy, you have a general public audience that I think folks on this call could probably write to and help explore that. Steve, I'm after Nancy, I'm going to ask you to kind of address that as well. How can we work together to maybe solve that goal, to get the word out, to pass on our passion for forestry and the breadth that there is beyond just cutting down trees. So Nancy, what do you have to say about that?
I think this is a tremendous idea. We have in the past done complete issues on forest landowners and their connection to the land. So that's what we have done, issues on consulting foresters, but it's been quite long ago in the past. So maybe we're due for something else like this. But there are two ways of looking at this. This can be part of a theme, you know, with multiple articles, or it can be perhaps a shorter article, maybe a 2-page article from consulting foresters or government foresters or academic foresters about what they do. We could highlight one job or one forester in a succession of issues. I'd say let's talk about this.
Yeah, well, and so, you know, I come from a pretty non-traditional, I guess I'm more of a forest ecologist, conservation, natural resource professional, you know, but I still consider myself a forester. And I think that there are a lot of people, you know, schools of forestry are now become schools of environmental management. And that's a whole other argument, you know, that I think might have been and could continue to be covered elsewhere. But I think, again, getting to that diversity of what are people doing now in the field of forestry to manage our forests? And as forests become, foresters have to manage so many conflicting ideals and goals, recreation, wildlife, and again, so much more than just cutting down trees. So I'd love it if we could collaborate, Nancy, with Pennsylvania forests.
Be glad to. Be glad to. I might make a comment here. Often in a newspaper, I will see something actually coming from the USDA, perhaps, which talks about farmers and foresters as being equivalent. They don't understand the difference between forester and forest landowner. And that just rubs me the wrong way every time I see that. So we could help this.
Yeah. Well, Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've came up with Steve's top 10 tips for writing, but instead of presenting all that, I wanted to go back to what you mentioned, passion, Sarah, a moment ago. And I think for foresters, when writing for a general audience, the last tip on my list is don't hide or let your passion free. Explain why to a general audience using terms that aren't going to confuse them, avoiding acronyms and so on, but explain why you are passionate about what you do and explain what you do. Here's what I do, and this is why I think it's important work. And I think doing that alone when we communicate with the general public will help further understanding of our profession. But it's important to use that passion, to let it out without ranting or lecturing, but showing that we have a passion, and that helps people understand what we do better than if we just explained in dry terms.
So Jim wrote a comment in that maybe foresters should think about and embrace how they value the diversity of landowner needs. Landowners in Pennsylvania put solitude, recreation, non-hunting wildlife way above timber harvesting. And this is a professional disconnect. And you know, I think that's a disconnect with the public too, that a lot of foresters, you know, foresters do timber harvesting. That's absolutely an important part of the forester realm, but a lot of foresters do have to manage, you know, those other aspects of the forest as well, even while doing a timber harvest or accounting for, you know, doing a harvest and thinking about what that's going to do to the future sustainability of all of those different aspects. Steve, I think we have time for you to share your top 10 tips. Do you want to do that? Well, because we've still got about 10 minutes or so to have.
Well, let's see. I will try to. Okay. Steve's top 10 tips. Well, Jim has talked about these, Nancy has talked about some of these, and I welcome questions on any of them for clarification. These are just the tips, and in my list, which I may publish in the Forestry source, when I write about this workshop, there's a little bit more text after each one, but know your audience. If you're writing for foresters, you know your audience, but maybe you don't. Maybe I mentioned earlier that foresters are very diverse. Some are focused on timber production, some are focused on wildlife habitat or fish or public recreation. So it's important to know who you're writing for. And talking, what do I mean by talking to your audience? Well, it's not, the Journal of Forestry doesn't talk to anyone, it explains, it's academic. But I like the more conversational tone, which tends to engage people in a conversation, whether they're foresters or another audience. Don't assume your audience knows, even if they're foresters, that you know what they know. Or you may have to explain topics even to foresters. And I would suggest that you should explain what you're talking about, even if you think your audience might know it. But keep it simple when you do that. Don't launch into lengthy explanations of technical topics unless that's appropriate in a specific case. Write about what you know. In other words, don't write about what you don't know. You can get into a lot of trouble if you're writing an article for a wildlife habitat managers and you're not an expert in that subject area. That might seem intuitive, but it's not always, we don't always remember that. Compelling images, and I have a hugely compelling image on the front page of the October edition that is about a huge mushroom cloud of wildfire smoke from a large wildfire in California. Images draw people's attentions, and Nancy, you mentioned that. So try to find compelling images. I thought about writing an article just about what makes an image compelling. Get another opinion on your writing. If you're writing an article for whoever, send that text to a colleague who can give you a real world opinion on whether you've covered all the topic adequately or whether you can fine tune a point and make it better. I tell my students this, but once you've written a draft of an article or a letter to the editor or anything, read it out loud to the mirror, to your dog, to your wife or friend or a colleague. And if it doesn't sound smooth, then it probably needs to be refined. I like the writing to sound a lot like what I would say, especially I'll go on. Brevity is a virtue. Instead of talking too much about all these points, I'll just briefly, I'll be brief. You can have too many words in an article that tire people out. Most people these days want short, succinct articles. I've had articles in the Forestry source of 4,000 words, and I get complaints from readers who say that's too long. We want a shorter article that we can consume in a few minutes. So consider your audience there. And as I said, number 10 is set your passion free. Don't be afraid to explain and to show that passion, that to show why you're so excited about your work. I'm excited by forestry, and other people who aren't foresters don't really understand that. So there's an opportunity to bring people into a conversation about forest management. We should take advantage of that opportunity.
And so, Nancy, you echoed that, to read it out loud and walk at the same time. How do you do that?
Walk at the same time. Print your article off. Find a place where you can walk maybe 15 paces in one way and then turn around and walk the other way. You will find that walking regulates your breathing, and breathing will indicate to you where the breaks should be in the text.
Oh, I never thought about that.
Yep. Taught to me
Interesting.
by an undergraduate English professor.
So that's part of your minor from undergrad, huh?
Yep, that's right.
Wow, cool.
Well, if I'm walking uphill, I won't be able to read.
I was thinking I was hiking on the Mid-State Trail earlier this week, and I'm like, and I that was the first time I'd been up there. I've been here like 20 years, and that was the first time I'd been up on the Mid-State Trail. And I know there's rocks everywhere on the trails here in Pennsylvania, but it seems more rocky than usual. And I was like, I can't do anything else hiking on this trail. So don't read your article on the MST.
Right. So my professor would send me out into the corridor that was outside the classroom. And if you want to feel really weird, you know, when classes are changing and you're walking up and down that corridor reading out loud, but it works. It really works.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Well, there's a lot of common themes here that run across all of our presenters and you and Steve. You know, practice reading. I think that getting another opinion open. Someone put in the where was it? You need a thick skin to be a good writer. Good writing requires a thick skin to receive edits without being too sensitive, and I think that's right. But I think you know, having gone through this series, having written that article for Susan, and gone through the editing process with Sandy and Tracy and Jared, you know, how much I've gained from having outside perspective. You know, I've used sort of the same colleagues for many years editing my work, and I can kind of predict. I know what they're going to pick up on. I know what they're going to, you know, the kinds of edits they're going to do, and having a different audience to send to and a different supportive group. So I think that's another reason we wanted to get this group together. So we're tentatively calling this the Rothrock Writers Guild, to try and create a community that can provide that outside perspective and editing to your work, and give you new ideas and kind of freshen your writing. Not only freshen your writing, but maybe give you a new enthusiasm or some responsibility to a different audience than just having an assignment. So Nancy, Steve, I don't know, do you have any other final thoughts for us as we embark on creating this group? Maybe what we can do within, so most of these folks, I think everybody's from the Allegheny division in SAF. What are your thoughts on this concept that we're trying to do, and any tips for us as we do this? Steve, you first.
I think a collaborative group is a grand idea, because so many of us are afraid to write. Those of us who aren't professional writers may be hesitant to take on a big writing project, but with the support of friendly editors with constructive criticism, the end product will be better.
Oh, I would just like to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, I would like to second that, and everyone is going to get the submission guidelines for Pennsylvania Forests, and I just want to read you one highlighted sentence in this. It says, "We will work with fledgling writers to hone their skills. We are particularly interested in making the work of professionals in the field of forestry intelligible to our lay audience." Exactly the same thing.
Absolutely. Good. Well, that's excellent. Well, so any final thoughts that you guys have for the Forestry Source and Pennsylvania Forest Magazine? Nancy, anything else?
I have one comment to make, because we've talked about writers that we look up to. And one of my favorite writers for a long time has been John McPhee, who is Professor Emeritus at Princeton. And I once heard him interviewed, and he could barely put two words together, but he told this story about how he writes. He comes down in the morning, you know, in his pajamas and his bathrobe. He gets his cup of coffee. He sits down to his desk with his yellow legal pad and his pen, and he ties himself into the chair with the belt on the bathrobe to force himself to write. He's an extraordinary, wonderful writer. but he has to force himself to write.
That's he's one of my favorite writers because he can make any topic, and he's written on such a wide
Yes.
variety of topics. He can make any topic absolutely amazing. Tennis, oranges, the Pine Barrens, which is how I was
Yes.
introduced to him. But it's amazing how he can make any topic compelling. He's absolutely up there of someone everyone should read. That's great.
Yeah.
Steve?
I might regurgitate a piece of advice that a writing professor gave me. Roberta Fanning said to her students, I was one of them, throw up on paper. You don't have to start with, don't focus on starting an article by writing the first paragraph and then finishing to the end. Or maybe you can do that, but if you're, I often have trouble coming up with a lead paragraph. What's going to attract someone to read that article? So I sometimes start by doing as she suggested and writing terms or sentences on a big piece of paper. Maybe it's a big yellow legal pad. And then maybe drawing lines between them to show connections or transitions between themes for that article. So get everything out of you that you want to write about, put it down on paper, and then rearrange them and fill in details.
Yeah, that's great. And so Steve, I just want Calvin Norman, who's been with us this series. He says, "Thanks for presenting. I'm a big fan of the source." So you got a lot of fans out there, and I definitely regularly read the Forestry Source and the Pennsylvania Forest magazine. I really appreciate you guys sharing your insight. And we only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to start wrapping things up with this session. We've been together here for about 2 months now, starting in August. Everybody has provided such inspiration, and Nancy and Steve, you guys are sort of where that rubber hits the road, right? You're the ones who are going to take this stuff that I hope the participants who are watching this live and then who also watch the recorded sessions, can get in touch with you guys and publish something after this session. Both in email and on rothrocksaf.org, we'll post the submission guidelines and anything else if you guys want to try and get some submissions from any of these folks, or you're after something in particular. Hopefully this could be a group that can help you in those endeavors and write some copy for you to fill some of those pages. Thank you guys for participating in this. I know many of you have seen your names over and over again, and I hope someday we'll meet in person, but we'll absolutely meet again here in a couple of months to start this workshopping process and start giving each other some additional pieces of advice and editing and inspiration and perspective. I've had a blast with this series. It's all going to be up online. Robert Piper says, "Big fan of the source. I have been edited by Nancy and it doesn't hurt." Thank you. That's great. No, it doesn't hurt, right? All right. Well, I want to open it up. And so I don't know if Sandy and Jared and Tracy, they're the other ones who have been a part of the, putting this series together. I want to open it up and leave them to share any final thoughts that they might have as we wrap things up.
Sarah, thank you for asking. I have no thoughts. I just was inspired again by the great things that we heard today, the authentic voices, the wisdom of each of the speakers about these things. And there's so much to learn here. In fact, Paul, who couldn't make this session, will be watching it. He takes detailed notes and then he writes out the key points that each person shared with us. And that will be on our website. And that's really something useful. I've gone back and looked at some of those notes that he took, and it's like a book in itself. So I have no more to say.
Jared, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the guests today, Nancy and Steve. I guess Jim. Oh, Jim's still with us, and Jim, of course. So this has been an amazing process. It's been a pleasure to work with Sarah and Sandy and Paul and Tracy throughout this process. I mean, there's for the consummate professionals, and it's been a lot of fun to watch you guys put this together. I've really just been kind of doing whatever I can, but it's been great to work with you guys. And so thanks again.
Tracy, I know how you love to be put on the spot.
Yeah, just wanted to say that this has really been inspirational for me. I think we take writing for granted. We do it a lot. We do it as we've noted. I think Jeff Larkin said, you know, writing emails is writing, but to really think about communication and writing, one of the things that sort of came home in the conversation today, and I think Jim got to that point, is language has changed over the years. When you talk about William Faulkner's writing, people don't talk like that anymore. You know, vocabulary has changed. So how do we adapt to changing understandings and the changing language that we have? And so having this conversation, I think, is very valuable. And I have been so inspired by the writers. So may get out that journal.
Thanks, Tracy. All right, well, that's it for us. Thanks, everybody, and we'll be back in touch shortly. All right.
Have time for one last comment?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, thank you very much. You've done a great job of putting this series together. But my final comment is the December issue of The Source will be a special issue on special forest products. If any of you out there want to write about the forest products you manage, mushrooms, ramps, whatever it is, let me know.
Excellent.
Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Thank
See you
you.
guys. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you all. Bye.
So long.
Bye-bye, thanks.
Thank you.